The galaxy was silent that night. Stars burned like frozen fire across the dark, endless sea. But on the edge of known space, inside the silver halls of the Galactic Union, fear had already taken root. Ambassador Vrix of the Talari stood before the Union Council. His skin shimmered like glass under the dim light, his voice trembling. The Devourers have reached Sector 9. Entire colonies are gone. No signal, no survivors. The room fell cold. The Union had always believed in peace and diplomacy and logic. For thousands of years, they had solved problems with words, not weapons. But the Devourers didn't talk. They consumed. Ships, planets, life, everything. Who can stop them? Delegate asked, his voice thin with panic. No one answered. Vrix stared at the holomap. Red zones spread across the stars like bleeding wounds. His homeworld was next. He thought of his family, of his people hiding beneath crystal domes, praying to gods that no longer listened. That night, alone in his quarters, Vrix opened the forbidden archives, records of ancient species, the ones the Union had banned contact with. Among them was one name that made even the bravest commanders afraid to speak aloud. Humans, the Deathworlders. They came from a world so hostile that most species would die there within minutes. Earth, a place of storms, hunger, and war. Every animal fought to survive. Even their plants were dangerous. But somehow humans thrived. They adapted. They conquered their own death world. Maybe, Vrix whispered to himself, we need monsters. To fight monsters. He sent the signal. It was short, simple, desperate. To any who can hear this message, the Galactic Union calls for aid. Our worlds are dying. Weeks passed. Silence followed. Then one morning the sky above the Talari capital turned black. Not from clouds, but from shadows. Giant ships, dark as night, drifted into orbit. They had no golden banners, no glowing emblems like Union fleets. They were silent beasts of metal, built not for beauty, but for war. Every sensor screamed as unknown energy signatures flooded the atmosphere. Defense systems locked on, unsure whether to fire or flee. Then through the static, a message came. A deep human voice, calm and cold. This is Captain Mason of the Terran Federation fleet. We received your distress call. The council gathered again, panic rippling through every delegate. Deathworlders. One shouted, they will destroy us. Vrix stood, heart pounding. Or they will save us. Let them speak. When Mason appeared on the holoscreen, his eyes looked almost mechanical, sharp, focused, tired. Behind him, the command deck glowed dim red, full of motion and order. No panic, no fear. We don't rescue, Mason said quietly. We neutralize threats. Give us coordinates of enemy activity. Wait, cried one alien general. We need to discuss, but Mason was already gone from the transmission. Outside, the human fleet moved like a storm given purpose. Their ships weren't graceful. They were predators. Engines roared like thunder as their formation tightened around the planet. The Talari people watched in silence. For the first time in centuries, they saw weapons designed to end wars instead of prevent them. Hours later, Vrix stood at the observation tower, watching the human vessels align above the horizon. He could feel their energy vibrating through the air, the hum of something ancient and terrible. Do you think they will come down? His aide whispered. Vrix didn't answer. Because he could already see them. Black dots cutting through the sky, falling like burning meteors. Human dropships. The first landed outside the capital. A ramp hissed open, and armored figures stepped out. Tall, broad, their suits scorched and heavy. They carried weapons that glowed faintly blue, and helmets that hid their faces behind dark glass. The ground trembled under their boots. Vrix approached slowly, hands raised. Welcome to Talari. One of them removed his helmet. Captain Mason's face was pale and lined, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned everything, sky, towers, soldiers, calculating risks, exits, weaknesses. When he finally looked at Vrix, his voice was low. You said you needed help, Mason said. Where are they? Vrix pointed toward the stars. Sector 9, they're coming here next. Mason nodded once. Then we'll meet them halfway. That night, Vrix could not sleep. Through his window, he saw the human fleet begin to move again, silent giants forming a defensive ring around the system. Their efficiency was frightening. Every ship, every signal, every movement had purpose. He thought of what he'd done. He had invited predators into a garden built by prey. Would they protect it or claim it? He didn't know. But when he closed his eyes, he could still hear the final words Mason had said before leaving the planet's surface. You called for help. Help is what you'll get. But understand this, when Deathworlders come, the enemy isn't the only one who changes. 2 days later, the Union's sensors detected movement. Thousands of enemy ships approaching from the edge of the system. The Devourers were coming, panic spread. Union fleets prepared for retreat, their captains already making excuses. But the humans didn't move. Captain Mason stood on his bridge, arms folded behind his back. His crew, men and women born under radiation storms and endless wars, moved with quiet precision. Sir, his second officer reported, enemy ships detected. 10,000 strong. Mason's eyes narrowed. Then they outnumber us 10 to 1. He smiled. Good. Saves us the trouble of hunting them later. The order was given. The human fleet advanced, engines igniting like small suns. The void lit up with fire as railguns, plasma torpedoes, and kinetic slugs tore through the darkness. The first wave of Devourers never had a chance. Vrix watched from the command screen inside the Union's orbital base. His entire council stood behind him, speechless. What they saw was not war. It was extermination. The Devourer ships fell apart under the humans' assault. In minutes, entire squadrons were gone. Where Union fleets would retreat, the humans pressed forward. Relentless, unstoppable. Every alien eye turned toward Vrix, some filled with awe, others with horror. What are they? One whispered. Vrix stared at the battlefield, at the fire raining through space, at the cold efficiency of human wrath, and his voice trembled as he answered, They are the Deathworlders. The battle was over, but silence was worse than any explosion. From the safety of Talari's orbital station, Ambassador Vrix watched the human fleet drift through the wreckage of the Devourer's armada. Huge alien ships, creatures of metal and fury, floated lifeless, burning quietly in the void. The humans had come like a storm, and now the storm had passed. The Galactic Union had never seen anything like it. Report, Vrix said softly. Enemy presence. Eliminated, replied his aide in disbelief. All of them, sir. Every last one. Vrix didn't celebrate. He only stared at the dark human vessels. There was something cold about them. Something that felt less like victory and more like warning. Aboard the flagship TFS Vengeance, Captain Mason stood in silence, looking at the data scrolling across the holoscreens. The ship hummed like a living creature around him. Alive, alert, hungry. Minimal damage, his officer reported. 3 ships with hull scratches. No casualties, Mason nodded. Good, send recovery drones. Clear the debris before it contaminates orbit. Yes, sir. The Union Council is requesting a debrief. Again, Mason sighed. They can wait. We still have work to do. He turned away from the screen, eyes hard as steel. To Mason, this wasn't glory. It was duty. The enemy had been destroyed, yes, but experience had taught him that wars didn't end when the shooting stopped. They ended when everyone understood what came next. When Mason finally arrived at the Galactic Union Hall, the aliens were waiting, hundreds of them, all colors, shapes, and sizes. The air smelled of metal and fear. The moment he entered, the noise stopped. Every eye followed him. He didn't wear fancy medals or shimmering robes, just a plain black uniform, the Terran symbol stitched in red over his chest. Behind him marched 2 human soldiers, helmets off, faces calm, eyes sharp. Vrix stepped forward, trying to hide his nerves. Captain Mason, on behalf of the Galactic Union, I thank you for— Mason raised a hand. Save the speeches. The Devourers are gone, but your problem isn't over, the council murmured, confused. Vrix blinked. What do you mean? They were destroyed. We saw it ourselves. Mason looked at him, his voice flat. They were a symptom, not the disease. He projected a hologram over the table. The image showed strange energy readings across dozens of systems, marks that looked too organized to be natural. These signatures, Mason said, match weapon tests. Someone has been making the Devourers. A cold silence filled the room. That's impossible, cried one alien commander. No species would create such monsters. Mason's lips twitched into something close to a smile. No species except one that thought it could control them. The room erupted in shouts. Vrix felt his throat go dry. If what Mason said was true, someone in the Union itself had unleashed the horror that nearly destroyed them. "Find out who," Mason ordered, turning toward the exit. "My fleet will remain in orbit until you do." Outside the hall, the alien press gathered, thousands of voices shouting questions in a dozen languages. Who were the humans? Why did they fight like that? Were they heroes or executioners? The humans didn't answer. Their soldiers moved through the crowd with silent precision, eyes scanning, weapons ready but not raised. Even without aggression, everyone moved out of their way. Rumors spread fast. They said the Deathworlders could survive without air for minutes. They said their blood was acid, their bones reinforced by iron. They said they could hear your heartbeat if you lied. Whether true or not, no one dared to find out. Later, Vrix found himself walking along the edge of the human landing bay, watching their massive ships resting like sleeping giants. The air was thick with the scent of oil and ozone. Sparks flew as crews worked tirelessly, repairing, upgrading, preparing for whatever came next. Mason stood nearby, watching over them. "You don't rest much, do you?" Vrix asked quietly. "Rest is for when the job's done," Mason replied. Vrix hesitated, then spoke the question that had haunted him since their arrival. "Why did you come? Why answer our call when the rest of the galaxy avoided us?" Mason turned, eyes unreadable. "Because that's what we do. Someone calls for help. We answer." He paused. "Even if they don't like how we help." The tone in his voice made Vrix uneasy. There was truth there, cold, simple truth. Humans didn't save for kindness. They saved because survival was in their blood. Far above the planet, the fleet shifted formation. Massive carriers opened their bays, releasing smaller ships, scouts, drones, and satellites. The humans were mapping every inch of the Union's territory. When Union leaders complained, Mason only said, "If we're going to fight your war, we need to know the battlefield." But deep inside, Vrix began to sense something else. The humans weren't just protecting them, they were studying them. That night, from his chamber window, Vrix watched the human ships again. They looked peaceful from afar, quiet, almost beautiful, but he had seen what they could do. He remembered the way they moved in battle. Calculated, merciless. They didn't fight like diplomats. They fought like survivors, and he began to wonder if the Devourers weren't the real danger anymore. Meanwhile, in the command deck of the TFS Vengeance, Mason received a transmission from Earth. The message was brief. Phase 1 complete. Awaiting assessment. Do not reveal intentions. He closed the comm quietly. His second officer, Lieutenant Hale, looked uneasy. "They're starting to suspect, sir." "They're supposed to," Mason replied. "Let them think they're in control. The faster they talk, the more we'll learn." Hale frowned. "And when they find out who made the Devourers?" Mason's expression didn't change. "Then they'll understand why we came." The next morning, the Galactic Union held a public ceremony to honor their saviors. Mason stood beside Vrix as alien leaders praised humanity for its bravery. But even as applause filled the air, Mason's gaze remained distant. His mind wasn't on the stage, or the medals, or the words. It was on the next battlefield. Because deep down, he knew something Vrix didn't. The Devourers were never the true enemy. They were only the beginning. Space had gone quiet again. Too quiet. The battle with the Devourers was over, but a strange tension now filled the Galactic Union. Their worlds had been saved, yet their hearts were restless. They had called for help, and the Deathworlders had answered. But no one truly understood who they had invited into their galaxy. Ambassador Vrix tried to calm the council. "The humans came when no one else did," he said. "They risked their lives for us. We owe them respect." "Respect?" one alien general hissed, slamming a clawed hand on the table. "They destroyed an entire fleet in minutes. What happens when we anger them?" "Will they erase us too?" Vrix didn't reply. He couldn't, because deep down he wasn't sure of the answer. Meanwhile, aboard the TFS Vengeance, Captain Mason was not resting. He studied the remains of the Devourer ships, their twisted frames and strange energy signatures. Human scientists in gray suits moved silently, collecting samples, scanning fragments, whispering data into glowing tablets. "Report," Mason said without looking up. Lieutenant Hale stepped forward. Preliminary scans confirm artificial structure, sir. These weren't natural life forms. Someone designed them. Can you trace the origin? Not yet, but there's something else. Hale hesitated. We found human DNA inside some of the samples. Mason froze. His expression didn't change, but his hand tightened behind his back. Human DNA? That's impossible, Hale nodded grimly. It matches ancient records. Genetic markers from pre-space era Earth. Someone used our own species as the base template for these creatures. Mason turned slowly toward the stars, eyes cold and distant. Find out who, and when you do, make sure they remember what it means to create a monster. On the Talari homeworld, Vrix had arranged a meeting between the humans and the Union Military Council, a first step toward cooperation. The great chamber glowed with gold light, its tall pillars carved from crystal. The humans arrived exactly on time. No ceremony, no escort. Captain Mason walked in with 6 soldiers, their armor black and scarred from battle. Their helmets stayed on, faces hidden. The air seemed to change around them, and colder, heavier. Even the guards flanking the room took a step back without realizing it. The alien commanders watched them carefully. One leaned over to whisper, "They look like machines." "They act like them too," another replied. Vrix forced a diplomatic smile. "Captain Mason, we welcome you once again. We wish to discuss the next phase of cooperation." Mason said nothing. He only looked around the hall, scanning every exit, every corner. His soldiers stood like statues. Vrix cleared his throat. "Captain, perhaps you could explain your methods, your strategies in battle. The Union wishes to learn from you." Finally, Mason spoke. His voice was calm, deep, and almost emotionless. "You don't need to learn from us," he said. "You wouldn't survive it." The council went silent. One alien general, proud and old, stepped forward, his skin a dark shade of green and his voice sharp. "Is that a threat, human?" Mason looked at him, expression unreadable. "It's a fact," the general sneered. "You think your kind superior because you kill faster?" "No," Mason said quietly. "Because we endure longer," the general slammed his fist. "We have survived for millennia. Our fleet spanned 10 systems. What gives you the right to—" A sharp sound interrupted him, a faint metallic click. One of Mason's soldiers had raised his rifle. Not pointed at anyone, just ready. But that single motion silenced the entire hall. Vrix's voice trembled. "Please, there's no need for violence." Mason didn't move. "There won't be, unless someone decides to test the difference between courage and stupidity." The soldier lowered his weapon. The silence that followed felt like a warning carved into stone. After the meeting, Vrix caught up with Mason outside the chamber. "Captain, you can't talk to them like that," Vrix said quietly. "These leaders need assurance, not intimidation." Mason stopped walking. "Assurance doesn't stop monsters, Ambassador," Vrix frowned. "You mean the Devourers?" Mason looked at him, his eyes cold, almost mechanical. "No, I mean the ones who built them." That night, Vrix couldn't sleep again. He looked out from the council tower at the stars above. Once symbols of hope, now symbols of uncertainty. What if the humans were right? What if the Devourers were not the true threat, but the beginning of something greater? His thoughts were interrupted by an alarm. Red light flashed across the windows. The defense grid was activating. "Report!" Vrix shouted, rushing to the comms console. A guard's voice came through, panicked. "Unidentified ships approaching orbit. Multiple contacts." "Devourers?" "No, sir." "Smaller. Faster. Unknown signatures." Before Vrix could respond, another voice cut through the transmission. Calm and cold. "Ambassador, this is Captain Mason. Stay where you are. We're engaging." Through the window, Vrix saw streaks of light erupt from the human ships. The Deathworlder fleet came alive again. Silent predators turning toward their prey. Moments later, explosions lit the sky. The unknown attackers were fast, but the humans were faster. Precision strikes tore through the black void, cutting their formation apart. Within minutes, the battle was over. When Vrix was finally allowed into orbit, the human shipyards were already cleaning up the wreckage. Who were they? Vrix asked. Mason's answer was short. They were trying to erase the evidence. Whoever made the Devourers doesn't want us finding out. Vrix stared at him. "So you think this is a conspiracy?" Mason looked out the viewport. No, this is a war. One your people didn't even know existed. He turned back, his expression like stone. And now that you've called us here, you're part of it. Vrix felt a chill run down his spine. What are you saying? Mason walked closer, lowering his voice. You asked for help, Ambassador. But help from Deathworlders comes with a cost. We don't fight halfway. Once we start, we don't stop until the truth burns. Vrix opened his mouth to speak, but Mason had already turned away. Barking orders to his crew, the humans began preparing for something new. Bigger, darker. A war that no one in the Union had seen coming. And as the stars flickered outside the viewport, Vrix realized that maybe the galaxy hadn't been saved at all. Maybe it had just awakened something far more dangerous. Fear spreads faster than war. The Galactic Union had survived the Devourers, but peace had not returned. Every planet, every species, every leader whispered the same word with trembling voices. Humans. At first, they were saviors. Now they were something else. Something unpredictable. Something unstoppable. Ambassador Vrix sat in his private office staring at the endless reports streaming across his datapad. Human fleets moving into unclaimed sectors. Human soldiers training Union forces without permission. Human scientists demanding access to restricted archives. The Union was losing control, not because of war, but because of fear. A chime echoed from his communicator. Ambassador, came the voice of a nervous aide. Captain Mason requests a private meeting. Vrix's chest tightened. He hadn't seen the human captain for several days. Each time Mason disappeared, something changed. Quietly, decisively, without warning. Send him in, Vrix said, trying to sound calm. The door hissed open. Captain Mason stepped in, his black uniform spotless, his face as expressionless as ever. Ambassador, he greeted. You look tired. I am tired, Captain, Vrix replied, setting his datapad down. Tired of unanswered questions. Tired of your ships moving without Union approval. You said you came to help us, not to take control. Mason's eyes narrowed slightly. Help means control, Ambassador. You don't stop a fire by asking it to burn slower. You smother it, and who decides when the fire's out? Vrix asked. Mason didn't answer. He simply turned toward the window, looking at the stars. Your people believe they're safe now. They're not. We've traced the genetic source of the Devourers. Someone in your Union engineered them. Vrix's voice broke. That's not possible. No one would... Don't lie to yourself, Mason said softly. The data doesn't lie. Across the galaxy, the stories began to spread. Alien miners on the ice world of Luther claimed they'd seen human soldiers walking through radiation storms without suits. A captured pirate fleet whispered that a single human boarding squad had taken over an entire battleship in 20 seconds. And on distant colonies, children played a new game, pretending to be Deathworlders who could kill monsters with their bare hands. To some, humans were heroes. To others, nightmares in human skin. On the Union's military base at Varn Prime, a group of officers gathered in secret. They can't be trusted, growled General Threx, his claws scraping the metal table. Their ships scan our planets without permission. Their drones follow our convoys. They say they're protecting us, but from what? A younger officer leaned forward. Sir, without them, we'd all be dead. Threx's eyes glowed faintly. Yes, and now we live under their shadow. The room fell silent. Every one of them knew it was true. The Union had become dependent on the very species it feared most. Back aboard the TFS Vengeance, Mason stood in the war room surrounded by his officers. The room's light flickered with holographic star maps, red, blue, and yellow lines showing the expanding reach of humanity's fleet. Lieutenant Hale frowned at the data. We've received multiple complaints from the Union Council. They're calling our actions occupation. Good, Mason said simply. Hale hesitated. Sir, forgive me, but are we still here to help them? Mason turned to face her. We help them by making sure they never make the same mistake again. Someone built the Devourers, someone within their ranks. Until we find who did it, every one of them is a suspect. And if they resist? Hale asked quietly. Mason's voice was cold. Then they've chosen the wrong side. Meanwhile, Vrix attended yet another emergency session of the Union Council. The chamber buzzed with anger and fear. They occupy our orbits, one senator cried. They scan our cities, shouted another. They interrogate our scientists without consent. Vrix tried to calm them. They believe someone among us created the Devourers. They're investigating. Investigating? Threx roared from the council floor. They're conquering. This is not protection. This is domination. The room erupted in noise, shouting, panic, chaos. Vrix raised his voice over the uproar. If we fight them, we lose everything. Do you want another war? The council went silent again. For a moment, everyone saw the truth. Humanity didn't need to start a war to win one. Their mere presence was enough. Later, alone in his chamber, Vrix watched a recorded message that Mason had sent him. The video showed a world far beyond Union space. Burned, silent, empty. Mason's voice played over the image. This is what happens when arrogance breeds monsters. Your Union created the Devourers. Whether you knew it or not, your scientists played God. We won't let that happen again. Vrix paused the video, trembling. What did Mason mean by, we won't let that happen again? Days later, a fleet of Union patrol ships went missing near the edge of known space. Only one transmission came through before silence. Unknown vessels approaching. They're not Devourers. They're static. Then nothing. When Vrix reported the loss to Mason, the human captain only said, "We'll handle it." Handle it? Vrix repeated. You mean you'll destroy them like you destroy everything else? Mason looked at him. His eyes were tired, not cruel. Ambassador, you still think this is about war. It's not. It's about control. The species that controls fear controls the galaxy. In the following weeks, humanity's grip tightened. Their ships now orbited every major Union world. Their soldiers trained joint defense units, but they answered only to Mason. Their scientists demanded full access to Union research centers, especially those studying genetic engineering. And everywhere, the same phrase began to circulate among the alien citizens. The Deathworlders are watching. Vrix stood at his window again, staring at the stars he once found beautiful. Now they seemed distant and cold, like the eyes of the humans who claimed to be their allies. He whispered to himself, "What have we done?" Because somewhere in his heart, Vrix knew the truth. The Union hadn't just called for help. They had invited a new power into their world, and that power was slowly becoming the very thing they had once feared most. The stars were quiet again, but everyone in the Galactic Union knew. Silence never lasted long when humans were involved. Ambassador Vrix stood inside the council chamber, staring at a dark hologram floating above the table. Showed wrecked ships, empty colonies, and coded data recovered from the outer rim. Each new image told the same story. The Devourers hadn't just been born. They had been made, and worse, the trail led directly back to the Union itself. How could this be possible? One counselor cried, "Who would do this?" General Threx growled, "The humans are manipulating the data. They're setting us up." Vrix shook his head. "No, the evidence is real. The genetic records, the laboratory coordinates. They match one of our own research divisions." "Which one?" another counselor demanded. Vrix took a deep breath. "The Bioforge division? On Helios Prime." A chilling silence filled the hall. Helios Prime was one of the Union's proudest worlds, a center of science and innovation. To think they had created the Devourers was unthinkable. Hours later, the Terran flagship TFS Vengeance arrived in orbit over Helios Prime. Its shadow blotted out the sun. Captain Mason stood on the bridge, his face stone cold as always. "Prepare the drop teams," he ordered. "No one leaves the surface until I give the command." Lieutenant Hale looked uneasy. "Sir, the Union requested we wait for their investigators." Mason turned his gaze toward her. "We waited long enough. Their investigators built the monsters that nearly wiped them out. Now we finish this." Moments later, drop pods launched from the ship, tearing through the clouds like flaming meteors. On Helios Prime, chaos erupted. Union security forces scrambled as human soldiers landed in formation. Armor black, weapons charged, helmets glowing faint blue. They moved like a single mind, clearing entire districts in minutes. The lead researcher, Dr. Kethar, was dragged from his lab, screaming that it was all a misunderstanding. Mason didn't listen. He walked through the shattered glass doors of the Bioforge facility, his boots echoing across the silent halls. Inside, the walls were lined with vats, tall cylinders filled with liquid, and the remains of half-formed creatures. They were horrifying imitations of life. Mason's jaw tightened. So it's true. Hale stepped closer to one of the tanks, her voice barely above a whisper. Sir, look at this. Inside the tank floated a shape that wasn't alien at all. It was human, half flesh, half metal, eyes open but empty. A twisted, failed experiment. Mason clenched his fists. They used our DNA, he said. Our history. They made monsters from us, he turned to Hale. Erase everything. No survivors, no data. Burn it all. Back in orbit, Vrix watched in horror as fire lit the night side of Helios Prime. What are they doing? A counselor screamed. That planet is Union territory. They're purging it, Vrix whispered. Explosions rippled across the atmosphere. City lights blinked out one by one. When Vrix demanded an explanation, Mason's calm voice came through the comm. You asked for help. Help means correction. You let this happen. We're cleaning your mess. Vrix slammed his fist on the console. You're destroying millions of innocent lives. So they won't make more devourers, Mason replied coldly. You think I enjoy this? We lost whole worlds to these things. Humanity remembers what happens when others play God. Then the transmission cut off. When the fires finally stopped, Helios Prime was silent. The once beautiful world was now covered in ash and debris. Vrix stared at the reports, heartbroken. You've turned into the very thing you promised to destroy, he whispered. But deep down, he also knew Mason wasn't entirely wrong. The Bioforge scientists had indeed created the Devourers, first as biological weapons, then as tools of fear. The project had spiraled out of control. Now, the cost was unimaginable. A few days later, Vrix met Mason face-to-face again aboard the Vengeance. The human captain stood by a viewport, watching Helios Prime burn below. You didn't have to destroy it, Vrix said quietly. You could have arrested them. Mason didn't turn. If you cage disease, it spreads. If you burn it, it ends. Vrix took a shaky breath. You killed millions. Mason finally looked at him. His eyes were cold, but there was something else there. Pain. Millions now, he said. To save billions later. Vrix shook his head. You think you're saving us, but you're breaking us. You can't rule by fear. Then stop fearing, Mason replied simply. When the report of Helios Prime's destruction spread across the galaxy, the Union fractured. Some worlds supported the humans, saying they had saved everyone from another Devourer war. Others called them tyrants and murderers. Protests broke out. Some alien soldiers refused to serve beside humans. Others begged to join them, believing the Deathworlders were the only ones strong enough to keep the galaxy safe. And through it all, Mason stayed silent. He didn't seek praise or forgiveness. He only watched, because he knew something no one else did. The scientists on Helios Prime had not acted alone. Someone even higher had authorized the experiments. Someone powerful. Late one night, Mason stood alone on the observation deck. Lieutenant Hale approached quietly. Sir, she said, the ambassador has called for another council. They want you to answer for Helios Prime. Mason didn't look away from the stars. Let them talk. The truth won't save them? Hale hesitated. Sir, what happens now? Mason's voice was low. Now we find out how deep the corruption goes. He turned, eyes dark as space itself. And when we do, we end it. The human way. Down on the Union capital world, Vrix sat alone, haunted by what he'd seen. He had wanted to save the galaxy. But he might have doomed it instead. He whispered to himself, we called for help, and brought judgment instead. Outside his window, the human fleet moved silently across the stars, a dark tide no one could stop. The galaxy had gone quiet again, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence before something terrible. Across the Union worlds, fleets hid behind defense grids, waiting. Rumors spread through every communication channel. The Deathworlders were preparing a full strike. No one knew where or when, but everyone feared it would be soon. Ambassador Vrix sat in the shadow of the Galactic Council chamber. Around him, the alien leaders shouted at each other, some demanding surrender, others calling for war. None of them realized that Mason had already made his decision. On the human flagship TFS Vengeance, Captain Mason stood before the holomap of the galaxy. A red mark glowed in the center, the core system home to the High Council, and to the last of the Bioforge scientists hiding under government protection. Lieutenant Hale hesitated. Sir, if we attack the core, we'll be fighting everyone. The Union fleet, civilian colonies, even medical ships. This isn't war, it's... Mason's gaze didn't waver. Judgment, he said simply. You saw Helios. You saw what they did. The Devourers were only one symptom. The infection goes deeper. He turned to his crew. Humanity didn't come here to conquer. We came to stop this galaxy from destroying itself. And if fire is the only cure, then fire it shall be. No one argued. The Deathworlders had made their choice. 3 days later, the stars above the core system darkened. Hundreds of human warships emerged from warp. Vast, black, silent. Each one carried enough firepower to erase a continent. The alien fleets scrambled to respond, their formations breaking apart as panic spread. The human fleet didn't speak. They just moved forward. Vrix, watching from the surface, tried desperately to open communication channels. Captain Mason, please. There are millions of innocents down here. You don't have to do this. A single reply came through the static. Mason's calm, cold voice. This isn't destruction, Ambassador. It's correction. The first salvo struck. Blue-white beams tore through the sky, slicing orbital stations in half. Explosions rippled through the upper atmosphere. Alien battleships tried to resist, but their plasma bolts barely scratched human armor. The Deathworlders' fleet advanced in perfect silence, their weapons glowing like burning suns. Down on the planet, cities trembled. Whole continents were covered in waves of light as the bombardment began. Buildings melted, oceans boiled, skies burned red. Vrix watched from the safety bunker, tears streaking his face. This isn't help, he whispered. This is extinction. On board the Vengeance, Mason stood at the viewing port, watching the firestorm. He didn't flinch. Hale approached slowly. Sir, it's over. The enemy fleets are gone. The planet's defenses are gone. We can stop now. Mason's voice was quiet. No, not yet. He opened a file on his console, the final recordings from the Bioforge archives. There it was, in the Council's own words. Authorization orders, experiments approved by every major Union world. They all knew, he said. They all let it happen. He closed the file. End transmission. Commence final strike. Moments later, every human ship opened fire at once. It wasn't war anymore. It was purification. Columns of fire turned the core into a sphere of molten glass. The capital of the Galactic Union vanished in a single heartbeat. Silence returned, but it was a silence built on ashes. When the light faded, only a few ships remained, Vrix's evacuation craft among them. He stared at what was left of his homeworld, a glowing ember where cities once stood. His communicator crackled. Ambassador Vrix, came Mason's voice. Vrix gritted his teeth. You destroyed everything. Everything we built. You built monsters, Mason said evenly, and you let them loose. You begged for our help. Now we've made sure no one can ever repeat your mistake. Vrix's voice broke. You think this makes you heroes? You've become worse than the Devourers. There was a pause. Then Mason said quietly, maybe, but the Devourers were born from arrogance. Humanity was born from survival. There's a difference. The channel went dead. In the days that followed, the galaxy changed forever. Half the Union worlds went dark. Others surrendered unconditionally. A few sent desperate messages of alliance, not out of loyalty, but fear. Human fleets began restoring order, deploying outposts and patrols. The message was clear. No more secret weapons, no more biological horrors, no more playing God. The Deathworlders now ruled through silence and strength. Vrix, now a refugee aboard a neutral station, watched the broadcast of Mason's address to the surviving worlds. The human captain spoke with the calm authority of someone who had seen too much death. This galaxy asked for our help. We answered. You feared monsters, but the monsters were your own creation. We brought judgment, not hatred. You wanted peace? Then remember this. Peace without accountability is only delay. The Deathworlders will not watch this galaxy burn again. The broadcast ended. The stars outside flickered like dying embers. Vrix whispered to himself, You didn't save us. You replaced us. But even he couldn't deny the truth. After the fire, the wars stopped. No more Devourers. No more secret labs. No more councils plotting in the dark. The galaxy was finally quiet. Too quiet. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Mason stared at the scorched planet below. Lieutenant Hale approached. "Sir, what happens now?" Mason's expression didn't change. "Now," he said softly, "now we rebuild. But this time it'll be on our terms." He turned toward the stars. "Because when the Deathworlders bring fire, they also bring order." The galaxy had changed forever. The stars that once shimmered with trade routes and bright colonies now floated over fields of dust and silence. The Galactic Union no longer existed, only fragments of worlds that whispered the same new name, the Terran Dominion. Ambassador Vrix watched from the viewport of the refugee station orbiting a dying moon. He had once been a diplomat for the proud Union, but now he was a survivor among millions. He had seen the end of his civilization, burned beneath the Deathworlders' fire. Every day new fleets arrived. Human ships and dark, efficient, unstoppable. They didn't conquer with speeches. They simply appeared, and order followed. On board the TFS Vengeance, Captain Mason stood in his command chair. The war was over, yet his face still carried the same weight it had during the battles. Lieutenant Hale approached carefully. "Sir, all Union systems have surrendered. The Dominion Council wants your approval for governance terms." Mason's eyes stayed fixed on the holographic star map. "Governance," he said softly. "Funny word for control." Hale frowned. "We restored peace, didn't we?" Mason finally looked at her. "Peace bought by fear isn't peace. It's waiting for the next explosion." Weeks passed. Humans began rebuilding the burned worlds. New stations rose above the ashes, powered by Terran technology. Medical drones healed wounded species. Factories distributed supplies. And new laws spread through every colony. But behind the kindness was something colder: absolute control. Each planet was assigned a human overseer. Each communication channel was monitored. Weapons research was banned under threat of orbital strike. The galaxy had become safe, painfully, perfectly safe. Vrix traveled to the newly built Dominion capital, once known as Solara Prime. The air smelled of fresh metal and regulation. He was escorted through a shining corridor to meet the man who had reshaped the galaxy. Captain Mason, now called High Commander Mason, stood before a massive window overlooking the rebuilding fleets. Vrix stopped a few steps behind him. "I didn't think you'd agree to see me," he said quietly. Mason didn't turn. "You sent enough requests." "I needed to understand," Vrix said. "You saved the galaxy, but you also enslaved it. Is this what humanity calls peace?" Mason was silent for a moment. Then he replied, "You mistake control for chains. The galaxy ran wild with arrogance and fear. We simply cut away the disease." "You burned entire worlds," Vrix said bitterly. "You became the same monsters you destroyed." Mason turned then, his eyes calm but tired. "The difference, Ambassador, is that we stopped when the job was done." Outside, ships moved like silver insects across the night sky. The Dominion banners shimmered above every port. Mason motioned toward the window. "Look at them. For the first time in centuries, no one's fighting. No devourers, no corruption. You asked for help, and now you have peace." Vrix met his gaze. "A peace that exists only because everyone fears you." "Fear keeps order," Mason said simply. "It's the one language this galaxy understands." Later, Vrix walked through the lower districts of Solara Prime. He saw alien children playing near human guards. He saw merchants trading freely under Dominion law. No one was starving. No one was dying. And yet, everyone looked over their shoulders before speaking. He realized the truth. Humanity hadn't conquered through power alone. They conquered through discipline, through the idea that no one would ever dare repeat the mistakes of the past. And somehow, it worked. That night, Mason stood alone on the command deck, staring at the stars. Hale joined him quietly. "Sir," she said, "the Dominion Senate wants to make this permanent. They're drafting the human charter. They say the galaxy needs leadership." Mason didn't answer for a while. Then he said softly, "Leadership becomes empire too easily." Hale nodded. "Then what do we do now?" Mason turned toward the stars, countless points of light across the void. "We stay watchful. If the galaxy learns, maybe one day we can leave it in peace. But until then," he paused, "we guard it the only way Deathworlders know how, in the refugee quarter, Vrix recorded his final report to what little remained of the old council. His voice was calm but heavy. We called for help. The Deathworlders answered. They ended the war, they ended corruption, but they also ended freedom. Maybe this is what we needed. Maybe peace born from fear is better than peace built on lies. Either way, the galaxy will never forget the humans. He closed the transmission and looked out the window one last time. The human fleet glowed softly in orbit, like guardians or jailers. Months later, a new starport opened on Solara Prime. Its name, Unity Gate. Mason attended the ceremony in silence. Aliens of every race stood beside humans. For the first time, they worked together, not as masters and servants, but as survivors rebuilding something new. When Vrix approached, Mason offered his hand. It's not perfect, Mason said. But it's a start. Vrix hesitated, then shook his hand. Perhaps this time, peace will survive. As the crowd cheered and ships launched into the sky, Vrix thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the fire, the fall of the Union. And yet somehow, hope remained. He whispered to himself, they asked for help. And the Deathworlders answered. Maybe, just maybe, they also brought a chance to begin again. The camera of the mind pulls back, out past Solara Prime, past the Dominion fleets into the quiet stars. Humanity stands guard over the galaxy, protectors, judges, and the reluctant kings of a reborn civilization. And somewhere, deep in the dark, another signal stirs, faint, distant, and unknown, because peace in the universe never lasts forever.